Welcome to the Texas Psychologist. I'm Dr. John Dolatorre, and here's a snippet from today's session.
And I was so resistant because I was like, I don't want to be like the dancing TikTok psychologist that like points to coping skills. No offense to them. I'm sure a lot of them are great. That was just not what I wanted to do. It is going. Thank you for having me. One of my
Yeah,
favorite other humans on the planet. And I don't say
yeah.
that lightly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's great news. It's great to hear. So, I wanted you on this episode of the Texas Psychologist because I wanted to talk about the psychology of experts, right? The psychology of online experts, the psychology of courtroom experts, right? The psychology of, just experts in general. If you would please give the audience a little bit of background, sort of who you are, what your practice is, and some of the other unique stuff that you get to do that a lot of other psychologists kind of don't get.
Sure. My name is Dr. Lina Haji. I am a clinical and forensic psychologist practicing primarily in South Florida. I'm also a PsyPact member and licensed in New York. You and I will have to discuss that later. I'm also a licensed mental health counselor. I have a master's in forensic psychology from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I have another master's in clinical psychology from Albizu University, and I have a doctorate in clinical psychology with a forensic emphasis from Albizu University. I worked in prisons on and off for about 22 years, 9 prisons and 2 forensic hospitals in 4 states, including California, New York, New Jersey, and Florida. So I'd like to think that I've seen a lot of what works and what doesn't work with correctional populations. And then I've been in private practice since 2020, I believe. So about 5 years doing mostly forensic evaluations, some clinical evaluations. And the majority of the forensic evaluations are things like competency to proceed to trial, not guilty by reason of insanity evaluations, juvenile mitigation evaluations. That's a broad term, obviously. I was doing some law enforcement evaluations and a little bit of civil here and there, a little bit of family court here and there, some threat assessments, risk assessments, pretty diverse. So that's the majority of my practice these days.
So, but not only that, you also are involved in TV. You have a show. Tell the audience a little bit about what television that you do.
Yes, I'm trying to be like you. I have a couple shows. So the one that seems to be the most popular is called The World's Most Evil Prisoners, and I'm on all three. There are 3 seasons. I'm on all 3 seasons. So for everybody out there, when you watch true crime, usually they have some kind of expert to discuss kind of how the killer became this way, or how the psychopath ended up doing the things that they did. And so I am that expert. Although, as you probably know, Dr. De La Torre, they record a ton and then they clip it into very small sentences, and sometimes watching that can be frustrating because it's like, I said a lot more than that, but okay. So yeah, there's World's Most Evil Prisoners. Another one is called Faces of Evil. They are both on Amazon Prime. And so yeah, I've been doing that for about 3 years now, and I kind of love that work because I get to explain to, in layman's terms, kind of what is going on with these egregious, you know, worst of the worst kind of criminals that are sometimes clinically fascinating and sometimes actually very one-dimensional and boring.
Yeah, for sure. So for our YouTube audience, they can see that your name and your IG handle is on the screen, but if you would please give your handle, how can people find you on social media?
Sure. So I have on IG, it's the name of my practice, which is Rise, RISE Psychological Services. My website is risepsychological.com. That's the only social media I have. And then again, World's Most Evil Prisoners and Faces of Evil are both on Amazon Prime.
So, one of the things that I know for your social media is you have Misdiagnosis Monday and you have Trendy Term Thursday. Can you tell the audience a little bit about right? Where did those things kind of originate from?
So I was very resistant to social media actually. When I first opened my practice, I printed a bunch of business cards and old school brochures and pamphlets. And I was going to go to lawyers' offices and the courts and hand these pamphlets out. And a friend of mine at the time was like, "What are you doing? This is not 1982." I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Yeah, you need to be on social media. Nobody is reading pamphlets and brochures. Nobody has business cards. You need to be on social media and talk about like what your passion is." And I was so resistant because I was like, I don't want to be like the dancing TikTok psychologist that like points to coping skills. No offense to them. I'm sure a lot of them are great. That was just not what I wanted to do. And then during COVID, when we all saw this like boom in people coming online and giving life advice, because everybody was stuck in their house, and I guess everybody thought, let me just set up a camera and make some money this way. I started to get really frustrated because there was so much misinformation out there, and it was being delivered by largely by unqualified individuals. And I thought, this is really dangerous. This is really bad because the talk of mental health was starting to the stigma is starting to go away, and it is starting to go away, which is a great thing. But with that comes just random people giving random non-evidence based advice, and I started to get really not just annoyed at it, but also felt like very protective of my field. Like I worked so hard and so long to get where I am, that it to see somebody erase science, so to speak, in 30 seconds was really frustrating. So I thought, let me start addressing some of this stuff. And then I just came up with the term Misdiagnosis Monday because I was just posting on Mondays and realized that I was addressing mostly misdiagnoses. And then Trendy Term Thursday came after a while. People started using these terms so lightly, gaslighting and bed
Narcissists,
rotting.
yeah.
Yeah, narcissists. And I was like, oh gosh, the overuse of these terms, I'm going to address that as well. So that's how that came about. And then people started to really say, like, thank you for calling this out, or thank you for explaining this. So that kept me going. I was like, yeah, we're on to something.
So it's a little bit of, right, the reason why you and I are talking is a little bit about your feeling of frustration when it comes to people who are not licensed, not mental health experts of any kind, but just kind of the random person who maybe is experiencing something, and maybe they're talking about their lived experience, or maybe they're just some random person who just Googled something and they're posting about it online. But from my view, there are also individuals who do have credentials who are posting nonsense online. And I think to kind of cut to the chase, right, to really talk about this, how can someone who's just doom scrolling, how can someone, from your perspective, how can someone tell the difference between someone that they should spend their time listening to and going through all of their content to actually be educated, versus someone who's only really in this because they do think that somehow they can monetize dancing around and pointing at all the different symptoms that are there on their TikTok?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And also, you bring up a good point, is that those are, people who just wake up and decide that they're going to call themselves a life coach with, with no education or training or licensure or governing body to, make sure that there's ethical guidelines adhered to, that's one thing. But when it's somebody with an actual license, it's almost more concerning. And I have friends in the medical community who see this as well. You know, you see nutritionists and medical doctors or physicians, and they too have to deal with, you know, so me as a layman of, for example, the medical community, if I'm following two cardiologists and they have opposing views, you know, yes, eat seed oils, don't eat seed oils, for example. How do I
Sure.
know?
Yeah.
Right. So, what I tend to do as a layman is look up the person delivering the message, first of all. You know, and I know that might take a lot of time, but if it's something as serious as your health, your physical health, or your mental health, I think it's worth it. Look up their educational background, their training, their expertise. You know, one Google search, and usually that's pretty readily available information. And then I look at what you talked about. Are they monetizing somehow? I don't make any money off of anything that I post ever. So for me, is this person trying to sell me something, a master class or a supplement? Is there some kind, you know, just like patients, is there some kind of secondary gain? And if there isn't, and this person seems to be consistently delivering a message with no kind of secondary gain, and everything, all the other boxes check out, the education, the training, the licensure, I tend to lean to more towards that individual than anyone else. But it can be hard because I see a bunch of psychologists delivering messages about forensic psychology. And the other thing I look for is, are they staying in their lane? So, for example, if somebody asks me questions about neuropsychology, I have minimum training in neuro. You know, I had the doctoral classes. I had some in practicum, some in internship, and I've done a lot of autism and ADHD evaluations. But if it's anything else, if it's a traumatic brain injury, if it's dementia, if it's a specific learning disorder, I'm immediately referring out. And I have no problem telling you, I have no idea about anything in that area, but you can go to this person. If I see somebody who's an expert on everything, to me, that's a red flag.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that goes to, once you start going through their content, how many different things are they talking about? Right. And I think that goes to something that I think I struggle with, but is kind of prevalent in our community. And that's the concept of evidence-based treatment. And here's my problem with it, right? So here it's more of a uh, terminology problem.
Sure.
I think people can use any one little thing as evidence that a thing worked. I think we're probably better suited as a field if we call it science based treatment, right? And I know, and I understand that we're probably nitpicking, we're probably like splitting hairs here, but here's what I'm trying to get at, which is, it is super easy to kind of just pick one thing and say that this thing is evidence of a much larger whole, as opposed to using a scientific rigor and saying, no, once we applied this thing, the science told us that this is either an element of the big, larger whole, or it's not an element of the larger whole. And so I think too often, quote unquote, experts are using that one tiny little piece of evidence, right? That one time that the crime happened, that it was the one guy who didn't put the cart away, that automatically means that your life will forever be shrouded in the fear that if you don't put a cart away, you're going to be abducted and some other nefarious thing, right? Like, but that's evidence based, right? It happened to one person.
Right.
That is a piece of
Right.
evidence, as opposed to science based, which is, no, that it may have happened once, but it's unlikely to happen to you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I never thought of the term evidence based that way, but that makes total sense. Also, I know you tend to think like a lawyer because you have that background. So that makes complete sense. And then the other thing is that I don't want to also discount lived experience,
Right.
but lived experiences are probably the most powerful tools sometimes. I think, for example, in the field of substance abuse, right? people will say, oh, AA is the only way to get sober, or rehab is the only way to get sober, or behavior modification, whatever. Everybody who I find substance abuse to be such a good example because I personally have patients, friends, and family who have gotten sober in a multitude of ways, right? So are they all evidence based? Or like, you know what I mean? Or like, what does the science might say one thing, or we can break down Alcoholics Anonymous is really just CBT with a spiritual twist. So is that evidence based? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I also think we need to individualize. And that is one of my biggest problems with social media content is that even though something might be science backed or evidence based, doesn't mean it's one size fits all. People are biopsychosocially complex. And so if you say, hey, this is how you treat narcissistic abuse, like what?
Yeah, it's and that again, yes, lived experience is important, but your lived experience may not be the same as someone else's lived experience, right? And that one of the other big things that I have a problem with is this idea of high functioning something, right? Like high functioning depression, high functioning anxiety, like high
I've made reels
functioning
on that.
whatever.
I've made reels on that.
That yeah, it's I want people to understand that when we describe emotions, all emotions, everyone has them. Everyone has all emotions. And that's okay, right? That's technically high functioning, right? We're talking about problems, and problems are not high functioning something. Like a
Correct.
problem impacts you, it impacts your life, it impacts you in a way that you begin to struggle, right? Whether you acknowledge the struggle or not, that's
Right.
something completely different. But it's more than just, hey, this is what's going on with me. That automatically means that that's what's going to be going on with you. That's not how that works.
No, and on top of that, how are we defining functioning? I mean, we have a way to define it as psychologists, but is it impairment in social functioning, occupational functioning? You know, I love this term with high functioning. I'm with you. I hate the term high functioning. High functioning alcoholics. Oh, well, I'm a high functioning alcoholic. I still have a job. I still have a roof over my head. My wife hasn't left me. I've never gotten a DUI, right? How are you functioning internally? How do you feel when you wake up in the morning and you have the shakes, or yeah. So again, how are you defining functioning? And again, we as clinicians have a way of measuring and quantifying how functioning, is defined. But I think it's a slippery slope to add high functioning in front of anything. Like you said, high functioning depression, high functioning anxiety, high functioning alcoholic, high functioning autism, whatever it is. It again, that's not individualizing. It's not individualizing it. It's not saying anything. And if it's so high functioning, then does it actually meet diagnostic criteria? What's really going on here? What are you saying? What are you trying
Yeah.
to say?
What are you trying to say? And I think that's where I think people kind of, right, if you're a consumer of social media, which most people are, if you're a consumer of legacy media, right, we're like you and I, you're more on social media than I am. I think we're probably equal when it comes to legacy media, but i think I think the concern is always going to be about, why are you saying these things, right? Now, has it been like chopped and edited, right? The way that, when we talk about on, when we're on camera, that we say, 25 words and then they only use like 10 of them, five of them, like that happens. But when you know that you're in control of what you're posting, why are you posting that? And I think as a consumer of whatever it is that you're looking at, you probably also need to be thinking, why is this person posting this? Are they posting it because they're trying to educate me? Are they posting it because they're actually trying to entertain me? Are they
Mm,
posting it because what they really want?
monetizing. They're trying to
Yeah, they're
monetize.
monetizing, right?
Yeah.
Right? They want to keep me afraid so
Right.
that I do something and it monetarily benefits them. I think it's hard to know. It's hard to know what's going on inside a person's head, despite what people may think about us. We're not actually mind readers. I have no idea what's going on in someone's mind. But from my perspective, it's always been, are they consistent, right? Are the words they're saying consistent with the manner in which they're saying it? And are they doing it because they think that this is important to do, or are they doing it because they're trying to make money? And I'm not faulting anybody who's trying to make money. I'm just
No,
saying,
agreed. Agreed. I'm not, I mean, this, social media has made it so that people can make income. I don't have a problem with that either. But also, are people willing to acknowledge that they are not the be all and end all? I like to use words like, heads up, I'm oversimplifying. I say that in a lot of my reels. This is oversimplified, or this is generalized. Are experts willing to say, I don't know? Or this is what, a lot of the time we as scientists have to acknowledge that we were wrong at one point. Conversion therapy, we were wrong. We were
yeah,
dead wrong. And then, but that didn't mean that we were wrong at the time. We were working with the best knowledge we had at the time. I'm not by any means advocating for conversion therapy at any point in time, but you understand what I'm saying.
yeah,
Even things like, do masks to help this, is 6 foot social
sure,
distancing necessary? Maybe it's 3 feet now. We have more updated research. We have to
yeah,
be willing to go along with that.
yeah, yeah. And I think some of that goes to the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, right? The other, psychology of experts. I think you certainly do this more than I do, and what you've done, your testimony that you've given in court has been aired, right? So the limited amount of times that I've testified in court, I mean, it's never been aired on television. So from your perspective, right, what makes a credible testifying expert in the court of law?
So I think it's actually pretty similar to what we're discussing regarding experts on social media. I think you have to be willing to acknowledge your shortcomings. I've seen experts testify and be presented with new information, and they're like, no, I'm right. I'm 100% right, and it's my way or the highway. And I find, and you probably know this better than me, is that juries don't tend to like that. And this goes for anyone. This is not just forensic psychology. This is like, any uh, forensic scientist, an arson expert, or, whatever the case may, a tire expert, whatever the expert is. So I remember I was testifying once, and I'm going to acknowledge this, and it didn't feel good. And it was about restorability, whether somebody could be restored to competency. And I opined that this gentleman could be restored to competency. And they said, Dr. Haji, did you know that six psychologists found him non-restorable in 2019? And I said, I did not know that. And they said, well, we emailed you those reports, and I had somehow, missed that email. It doesn't happen often. I'm obsessed with checking my email. It doesn't, but this happened on the stand. And, the lawyer said, Dr. Haji, we emailed you September 28th at 3:28 p.m. these 6 reports that say he's non-restorable. And on the stand, I didn't go, well, that doesn't change my opinion. I go, you know what? If 6 other experts found him non-restorable in 2019 or whenever it was, then I could be wrong. There's a possibility that he is non-restorable. I acknowledge that. I have to admit, I missed my email. I didn't read those reports, and I could be wrong while I'm testifying on the stand. And I think the judge and the lawyers appreciated that. That I was like, yeah, maybe I may have messed up, and I'm saying it here on the record. It is what it is. I'm a human. It wasn't
Yeah,
fun, and I thought about it for 2 hours when I went home that day and thought, oh my God, I have to text John and Nicole. But it was, I think that the judges are like, hey, that's an expert we'd want back, because they're willing to acknowledge stuff, at
yeah,
least.
yeah. That's not to say that that just because 6 experts said that, so, and this goes back to even social media, right? Like, just because you find yourself in an echo chamber of, oh, you know what, this expert said that it was this thing, and this other expert, said it was this thing, and this other experts,
Yeah.
just because 6 people said that it was this one thing, you have no idea that it could have been that 5 other experts were just quoting the first one, and the first one failed to actually look at anything other than whatever their evaluation was. So I think just because I think you say what you have to say when you know that they scored the point, right?
Right.
The attorney scored the point. You didn't look at the email, right?
Right.
Like you didn't look at the reports. But I think, what you would have heard from me would have been, I mean, sure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're right, right? Just because someone says that this is something, just because there's a preponderance, right? I think we get that a lot now.
Yes.
That there's a lot of mis and disinformation actors out there that are just trying to flood the zone, is a term that I've been hearing, right? They're just trying to flood the zone with this certain amount of information. That doesn't make them right. Doesn't make
No,
them right.
agreed. And I acknowledge that. I didn't say, because then they said, does this change your opinion? And I said, no, not necessarily. But I would have to read those reports and come back, to be honest. And I'm sorry if I delayed the court's time, and I'm sorry I missed the email and I was profusely apologetic. But does this mean that I think he's 100% automatically non restorable? Not necessarily. And so I was willing to say, I don't know, which is not fun in court.
No,
And I think people should be willing to say, I don't know, when they don't know.
Yeah. No, it's definitely not fun when you don't know something and then they call you out on it and they say, well, what do you mean you don't know? Aren't you a doctor?
Yeah, it wasn't a good
right?
day.
So I think, I think it's just it's one of those things that happens in court, but I think it's a good lesson for anyone who's a consumer, right? Because this was in front of the judge, but just imagine what it would have been like in front of a jury, or just imagine that you're a jury of one, right? You're a jury of the one person who is trying to find something to anchor your own lived experience in, and someone is telling you this is definitely what it is. I don't know that there's ever a definitely, right? Like, I don't know that word can really be used for anyone's lived experience, right? Because we don't really know what's inside a person. We haven't lived in their shoes. So this idea that some other person who may or may not be experiencing the things that you're experiencing is telling you this is definitely what you need to do, I think you need to be kind of cautious with someone like that.
And we are trained that way. So for example, like, you and I have both done like violence risk and sex offender, like recidivism things, like for somebody to say, oh, 100% chance you let him out, he's going to rape again. 100%. Right. Nobody can say that. I don't care if he's the most egregious, psychopathic, serial killing, rapist person on the planet. We can say that in layman's terms.
Sure.
But you and I know, and we are trained, nobody knows. Nobody knows when it comes to things like future offending or, diagnosis. We can't. It's not 100%. And if you come across somebody who's saying anything is 100%, that is a red flag.
There was someone... So one of the things that really grinds my gears, as it were, is when I am asked to be on with a body language expert.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So right, just for our listening audience, Dr. Haji just put her head in her hand. So I need everybody to understand. So all of the listeners need to understand that the science behind body language is flimsy at best, and we will just leave it at that. But this person that I was on, and I don't remember what the case was. Obviously, it was a live trial that was being aired on television, but
I
the
remember watching this. I remember watching you, and I was like so proud of how you handled it.
so, this expert had written a book called "You Cannot Lie to Me." I don't think that that's the actual title, but I think that's like the under title, right? Like the subtitle.
Right.
And I just, yeah, I can. And
Yeah,
and
I
you
can.
and you'd never know, right? You would never know what I would say would be a lie, right? Because the truth is that we're not very good as people. We're not very good at knowing when someone is lying to us, but we know fairly well when someone is telling us the truth. And I think if you're a consumer of any kind of content, I think you need to really feel that, right? That, well, I'm going to be able to tell when someone's lying to me. No, you won't. No, you won't. But you'll feel when someone's telling you the truth and being authentic online. And I think that's why I don't know what your views are for any of your reels, but I think people are gravitating towards your content because of its authenticity, because you're not trying to kind of pull the wool over someone's eyes or make someone believe something that you think is accurate or whatever, you know?
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate that, and I agree. I think we've worked with populations that lie to us all day, every day, and are there days where I'm like, I can totally tell they're full of it? Yeah. Am I 100% accurate in that? No, never. And I'm not willing to, even if they took a polygraph, which not, I
Yeah.
digress, but like, it, and I think those are valuable lessons to learn, like when I was early in my career and green and wanted to, help save every single inmate on the planet, whether they wanted to be saved or not, quote unquote. Um, I learned some tough lessons. I got lied to. I got manipulated. I needed that. I really needed that. I look back and I think I'm so grateful, that I was, not in really bad ways where I was, doing anything illegal or anything, but just little quick lessons of you're not as smart as you think you are. And I want to keep that humility no matter how far I get in my career. And that's why, for when I first opened my practice, actually I was working, it was COVID and everybody was at home and I was kind of working in a vacuum. And I have a mentor who said, "Who do you consult with?" And I said, "What do you mean?" Because I was doing competency evals and I've done like 900 of them at the time. And I said, "No one." And she said, what are you doing? You can't practice in a vacuum. And I said, "Well, I'm a solo practitioner. It's just me and my patient and my laptop." And I realized, oh my gosh, I have to make sure I don't get too comfortable in this vacuum. And that's when I started reaching out more to you and Dr. Vienna and Dr. Mack, who's, not even forensic, but she's a wealth of clinical knowledge. Dr. Silber, we started going to conferences together and my eyes opened. And sometimes, again, it's kind of like that experience in court where you're like, gosh, I'm not as smart as I think I am. And that is a good thing when you realize that. Because if you think, I've worked with forensic psychologists who think they're the be all and end all and they know everything. And it's really frustrating because it's like, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. And
Don't do that.
and I think, that again goes to it goes back to what consumers are also taking in online, which is if you're hearing only kind of one side of the story, I think you probably need to take a step back and maybe listen to the other side of the story. I've known plenty of psychologists who adhere to a certain ideology
Hmm.
and are unwilling to see the opposing side and kind of, parrot back those ideological ideas, right? Those dog whistles. And instead of just saying, "Oh, wait a minute, my job is to like legitimately either be the devil's advocate or to acknowledge and, advocate for a person's perspective," but they don't do it themselves, right?
Right.
It's so easy to be human and to fall into an echo chamber of whatever you want to hear, and it's so much more difficult to find your way out of it.
Right. And I think with social media, and I'm a victim of this too, because we all know our algorithms are set up to be the way that they are. And I think sometimes I forget, oh my gosh, everybody's algorithm is not like mine. So
Right.
I'm consuming this stuff that I'm looking at all day, whether it's sending cat memes to Dr. Mac or whatever it is. And I'm just thinking the way that I see my social media and the way that I see the world, you unconsciously or subconsciously think that everybody else is seeing the world the same way, right? And it's set up that way. And I've fallen victim to it as well. But one thing I think of, and this is what's so pertinent for us as forensic psychologists, I'll give you an example. I started doing not guilty by reason of insanity evaluations only a couple years ago, so I haven't done that many. And as you know, they're super tedious and so many records, and you have to watch like hours of body cam footage and all that kind of stuff because you're getting the mental state at the time of offense, of course. And I took a training by Concept. I forgot who it was, but it was one of our guru mentors, so to speak. And I remember they gave us the decision tree of looking at the evidence for meeting NGRI and looking for the evidence for not meeting
Yeah.
NGRI.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. And I think we should do that more often to the point where it kind of becomes automatic in our head. And I think we need to learn how to do that with social media because that decision tree for NGRI is brilliant because you end up being hopefully as ethical and objective as you possibly can. And I think if we apply that decision tree to everything we consume, I'm being idealistic here, but if we start to do that a little bit, it might become automatically to us to have that internal decision tree every time we consume something. And I think most people don't. They're just spoon fed.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to a larger kind of systemic issue of critical thinking, that a lack of critical thinking that's going on. And again, the algorithm is designed, right? It's designed as a concept. It's designed to keep you trapped, right? And then the insidious nature of the algorithm is that you then feed into it, right? Like the more you spend kind of scrolling through the same content, the more likely it is that the algorithm is going to feed you that content. But that algorithm was already designed to feed you that content anyway. And
Right.
so you're kind of on a hamster wheel of running this thing, when sometimes, right, as the hamster, you need to realize, oh, wait a minute, I can get off the wheel,
Yes.
you know?
Yes, and as we are aware of this, and we are psychologists, so we should know better. And I'd be lying if I said I haven't been there, where I'm on my phone and I'm finding myself angry. Like you've been doom scrolling for 15 minutes, Lena. You're avoiding writing a report, and you're just sitting here angry because you're on IG. Like do what you like. Stop. This is literally designed to make you angry so that you react, so that you engage, so that you help monetize, so that you keep going. And even though I have that awareness, I still fall victim to it, all the time. So if I'm doing that, and I'm not saying I'm better than, but I have the knowledge of it, I can only imagine 13, 14-year olds, these younger
Sure.
populations, it's so dangerous. It really is.
And some of them are doing it, right? This is where they get their education, right? Like previously, if you really wanted to get kind of like social learning education, you needed to go to a public school, right? Because public school, that's where you kind of interacted with other people, and you had to learn how to be a human being amongst
Right.
other human beings, right? So you didn't go to public school to learn, right, book smart. You went there to learn how to be a human being.
Correct.
And I think that left a gap in, well, our schools are now, struggling so much that there's a legitimate concern as to where kids are getting educated, right? And if they're going to YouTube shorts to get their education, and the YouTube short content creator has some kind of secondary gain, as we would call it,
Right.
involved in making that content, but the consumer doesn't know that they have that secondary content in it. Or maybe they know and they're just, you know what, everybody's trying to make a buck. Fine.
Yeah.
But there's also there are also other experts that are out there that, yeah, they're trying to make a buck and you can see it, but they're also purposefully trying to get something else out of it, either a television show, or they're trying to get more clicks and views for the content, right? Or they're just trying to perpetuate a myth, right? Stereotype, whatever you want to call it, but
Yes.
perpetuate a myth, right? How do you know, as a consumer, how do you identify when someone has that unknown secondary gain? How can you tell?
I don't know. I don't know that we can tell. You know how when we go to conferences and we have presentations, the presenter, or when we present, we always have to disclose if there is any financial, like if
Sure.
Milan does
Yeah.
the, by the way, I'm getting money from the MMPI or whatever it is.
Right.
I
Yeah.
wish that that's how it worked all the time. Unfortunately, it doesn't. So I think it's on us as consumers to once again to do that research. Like you said, why is this person posting this? What is the message they're trying to deliver? I'll be honest, when I first started posting my misdiagnosis Mondays, my motive was anger. It was I was so enraged at the misinformation out there, and these young kids saying like, "Oh, trauma caused my ADHD." And I'm like, "Oh god, okay." Like I had a physiological reaction, and I was like, these kids are getting the wrong info. And so that was what drove me, and then it just kind of took off. um but I think we have to do what you talked about, which is why did they record this? Why are they posting it? What are they getting out of it? Kind of like when we evaluate a patient. What you know, what is the response style? Why? What's
Yeah.
the second kind of really?
Yeah. Yeah. And uh, a lot. There's a lot of disclaimers on a lot of mental health YouTube podcasts or audio podcasts. Would say that this is for entertainment and
Mhm.
educational purposes only. There's a disclaimer on this podcast that says that this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. And I think that it's not a supplement for mental health. I mean, I think we're focused on mental health related topics, but I think this can go for really any topic at all, which is people may try, either they have the nefarious purpose to do so, or they just they have a secondary gain, and whatever happens to you as a consumer is kind of incidental. But
Right.
everybody has an everybody has a blind spot, right? That you don't really know what you don't know. And because of that, you hope that there's someone on YouTube. So YouTube is the second most used search engine, right behind Google. And so if you're going to YouTube to try to find a video on how to replace a light bulb, I mean, you're going to get a million ones, but now each one is talking about, well, different kinds of light bulbs and
Hmm.
what light bulbs should you be using under what circumstances and in what
Hmm.
area of your house or whatever. Like, there's just so much that you can kind of get lost in the weeds for the amount of content that's there as well.
There's so much, and there's so much unregulated, and that's what's really concerning. I've seen some articles about, the Chinese saying you can't speak on a topic unless you have, an education and training license to speak on it. Sometimes I'm thinking we should adopt that over here, because it's really ridiculous. And I'd be lying if I told you I haven't gone to YouTube to figure out how to change my oil and successfully done it. So, there's pros and cons to everything. Um, but I think, even with documentaries, I find myself like, okay, so Dr. Mack from Revealing the Ivory Towers, her and I, we watch documentaries, even though she's in Texas, and we watch them together and we text each other. And it's fascinating how we'll watch a documentary from a quote unquote reputable source. It'll be a huge company like a Netflix or an HBO
Yeah.
Max or whatever. And we're like, yeah, yeah. And we're just oh my God, what a narcissist. What a psychopath. Definitely had Munchausen's. We're doing all of that, because we're human, and we're doing all of that. And then, 2, 3 months later, information is presented on the flip side of the documentary. And Mac and I are like, oh my God, we were spoon fed. You know, she didn't have Munchausen's or whatever it is. And I'm just giving an
Yeah.
example. So it's not just YouTube, it's not just social media, it's regular mainstream media, it's newspaper, it's everywhere where we just assume that what is presented to us is fact because everybody should have integrity and documentaries should be done by journalists with integrity and no motive.
Yeah, and they should, right? And they
Yes.
should. And I think, there are a majority of those that do, but I think the problem ends up becoming that their voice is kind of silenced in the cacophony of other people's voices who are telling you that, well, this person obviously had Munchausen's because, clearly they had an eating disorder, right? Like it's that kind of, that narrow thing, right? They with someone trying to make it so simple for you, a concept that is so complex, right? If they're
Yes.
trying to give it to you in a simplistic kind of way, then you need to be concerned that perhaps either they don't have a full grasp of the concept itself, or they're trying to make it so that they keep your attention just that much longer. And it's not about telling you the truth, it's about holding your attention.
Yes, and I learned this the hard way. Well, not the hard way, but I learned this when I was on the other side of the camera, as you probably did too. And I'm not knocking any of the shows I did because I think they're very well done and I like them a lot. But they have to do what they have to do because, like you said, they have to get everything into 59 minutes. And so I remember there are times where I'm discussing a famous serial killer and I'm giving, again, a whole biopsychosocial and the head injury and the childhood trauma and the abuse. And then there was this misdiagnosis of bipolar disorder. And I'm going on and on. And then when I watch the show, it just says, like, and he's a psychopath. And I'm like, okay, but wait, I said 400 things before that and 400 things after that. So I sometimes I end up coming off as like the that's pretty obvious expert. And I get it. I get it. They had to fit, what Dr. Haji said in under 18 seconds. And
Yeah.
and and the show is great and I love it, but I'm like, I said more. I said more than that.
Yeah, and I think that's I come from live television, right? So my background, in terms of doing media work as a psychologist, is on live television, and so I generally get, maybe if I'm lucky, I get 1 minute, but for the most part, I get between 30 and 40 seconds to get out like everything that I know about a concept to a question that I don't know is coming, right? I can assume, kind of based on the content that we had just watched,
Right.
what the question could be about, but I don't know the exact question that I'm going to be getting. And so I have to be able to distill that information into a soundbite, right? Because that's all that I really get. But my concern has always been about those experts who are purposefully trying to create a soundbite because they want to get the clicks, right? I'm constrained by time, right? But I think other people are just trying to find a way to make it short, sweet, and catchy because that's what they think will monetize the best.
Right. And now that I think about it, I have even more appreciation for you because I watched so many of your clips and I'm like, wow, he nailed that. And I never thought, you don't even know the question and you have 30 seconds to answer. I never even thought about that. That just tells you how much I'm just a consumer. So kudos to you because I'm always like, wow, John is really good at that. But yeah, so you see these posts that say like people who post their online workouts are narcissistic, or people who watch true crime shows are higher on psychopathy, or these
Yeah.
one sentence blips, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I post my workouts and I watch true crime, so I must be a narcissistic psychopath based on these posts that
Yeah.
I'm seeing. Maybe I am. I don't know. But those work so well because I'll see those one sentence, and it doesn't even have to be something like that. It can just be, something as ridiculous as like I've seen like, if you look down at your knees when you're talking, that means you have autism, and it's like, oh my god,
Yeah. Yeah. No, no,
like,
it's ridiculous. No, that there is.
and then it spreads like a wildfire.
Yeah. Yeah. There are no behavioral cues that are cold. That's a cold read, right? And I think, I think a lot of people kind of mistake my disdain for body language to then say that I'd never use body language in an assessment or something like that. What I want to make clear is that cold reading someone is not possible. There are other things that are at play. And I think that if someone is attempting to cold read you, right? If someone is attempting to pull a scam on you, the easiest thing for them to do is to make it seem like it's relevant to you, right? That's why horoscopes have lasted
Yes,
as long as they have,
yes,
right?
yes,
Because it's so vague that it becomes specific to you, right? But you
totally.
did all the work. You did all the work. You're the one that interpreted that vague statement in order to make it relevant to you. They didn't do that. And
Right.
so that's the other element of these sort of these scare quote experts that we see, is that they're saying these kinds of things in order to hook you and make
Yes.
you do all the work in terms of making it make sense. When the reality is that if you really stop to listen, that they're not right. They're just not right.
I never thought of it that way. That's a really good point. They give a blanket statement and then you start to think that you've interpreted it the right. I think horoscopes is a great example. And by the way, I'm with you on body language experts. We do use body language. We do mental status exams.
Yeah.
A mental status exam has a lot to do with, we're looking at
Right.
eye contact and affect and gait and posture. I mean, so we are using body language. But just like anything else, it's one piece of the puzzle. It's one piece of the
Yeah.
puzzle. I just made a reel on flat affects, and how, lately I've been seeing a lot on social media of a flat affect automatically equating to psychopathy, like Brian Kohlberger, who
Right. Yeah.
reportedly, who reportedly had met criteria for autism and also psychopathy. We don't know, but a flat affect could mean anything. Psychosis, autism, psychopathy. Are they on antipsychotic? It could be, So I'm seeing a lot of that about flat affect. I just made a reel on that.
Yeah, and it's something that gets brought up a lot in terms of, if we want to stay on Kohlberger for a second, where I've heard experts use that to identify him as being a psychopath. And the reality is that if they look at the research on perpetrators of mass violent acts, right? So mass casualty events, so school shooters, right? Workplace shooters and stuff like that. What the research has shown is a discharge of emotion to the point where it's not so much that they're not feeling anymore. It's that the intensity of feelings that they were having has dissipated to the point where they can feel relaxed and calm. I mean,
Right.
in our day-to-day lives, we don't feel happy. We don't feel sad. We don't feel these things because we're too wrapped up in doing other things. So if someone were to watch us, right, some outside observer just watch us, they would say, "Oh, well, Dr. Delatorre has flat affect,
Yeah, right.
10 hours of his 12-hour workday." It's like,
Yes.
well, yeah, because my body's not being asked to do something highly emotional. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
of course. And so, other people would say, well, this is it's court, right? Or you're being arrested, or you're being tried for a crime, right? Or you're like, whatever it is, expecting someone to have an emotion, when the reality is that you don't have to. You probably are, but that doesn't mean that your face or your body are going to show it.
Yeah, and yes, I agree completely. And yeah, nobody's animated all the time. That's exhausting. I see this a lot. Unfortunately, I know you don't because you're healthier than me, but I do listen and watch to way too much true crime. And the consensus that I've gotten is that, for example, grief after a murder, right? Measuring the
Yeah.
grief is
Yeah.
indicative of guilt. Or the other one I see a lot is 911 calls.
Yeah.
The affect on a 911 call is
Yeah.
indicative. And the true crime stuff that I listen to now, maybe in the 80s, obviously it was different, but now they're like, no, the way somebody conducts a 911 call or grieves at a funeral tells us little to nothing because it needs so individualized.
Yeah. And I, as part of kind of my work experience, I get 911 calls for all of the cases that I work too. And a lot of them, I mean, they're witnessing something, but they're not necessarily kind of animated to the point where they're distraught. They may be confused, right? But I mean, there's nothing to say that someone has to be a certain way. And this was something that I had happened when I was recording a podcast episode for a different host, and they had a journalist on that was covering the case that we were discussing. And I had said that what we need to do with this individual who's being accused of a crime is look at the consistency in their behaviors, with their words, with their affect. And so, you know, this person did not seem to be saying and behaving in a way that's consistent. But the journalist took it upon herself to say, well, I've seen this many individuals who've been involved in this kind of crime before, and no one's consistent. Everybody's different from one another. And I said, well, yeah, people are different from one another, but that's not what I meant, right? You're consistent within yourself, not
Yourself, yeah,
consistent from one time to anybody can be different from one time to the next.
yeah.
Different people will react differently to the same situation. But she was again using this journalist was using this idea that, well, I've seen it so many times that I must be an expert in it too. When I think it goes back to something that you said at the beginning, which is you kind of need to stay in your lane. I'm
Yeah.
not sitting here telling you how to be a journalist. That perhaps we need to pay attention to the psychologist when he talks about emotions.
100% agreed. And it's kind of like, you know, what's the term I'm looking for? Internal validity, right? Like the beginning of the MMPI and the end of the MMPI.
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, are they? Yeah, like a Scott. I'm thinking you have me thinking of like Scott Peterson, right? Like if we're gonna
Sure.
judge affect, Scott Peterson couldn't care less. Right after she disappeared, couldn't care less to show up at the vigils. Couldn't care less. He couldn't care less the whole entire time. He was pretty consistent with couldn't care less, right?
Yeah.
So then everybody was like, "Well, look, Scott Peterson's guilty. He couldn't care less." But it was a pretty lengthy period of time, and then of course he was found guilty. But of course, it wasn't one piece of information. It was
Right.
it was in context. It was in context. Um, and I think that's again the same thing with social media in context. It's just and it's frustrating because social media can be such an amazing tool and can bring I get a lot of pleasure from I'm a diehard Knicks fan. I follow Knicks pages and I like I like animals and I like funny meme pages and I like following other therapist accounts that talk about the hardships of working in mental health, and it can be a source of a lot of joy, but it can also be a source of a ton of frustration. And like you pointed out, I have to be aware that it's designed that way to keep me stuck, and it works very well.
All right. Well, that's it for this topic. Thank you very much for joining the Texas Psychologist, Dr. Haji. It was great to talk to you.
It was great to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me. We should do this anytime.
Yeah. Awesome.